Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is the 7th session of the course Tours for Post-Conflict Urban Recovery, Ukraine, organized by TU Delft in collaboration with UN, Ukraine, the Netherlands Urban Network, the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in Australia, Zao University, and our Ukrainian partners. So we thought that Roberto will be a bit late, but he's actually on time. But still, today I have a privilege to open the session. My name is Paolo Gorochovsky. I'm an architect from Ukraine. I work as an advisor to the Dutch Board of Government Advisors, CRA, which deals with urgent topics of today, from the energy transition to bio-based construction, from sustainable mobility to new cultural landscapes in the city. And since February last year, we have also focused on the dignified recovery of Ukraine. I'm also a team member of UN, an organization that initiated this course. Let me tell you a little bit about us. So Ukraine, the Netherlands Urban Network is a platform for Ukrainian and Dutch spatial professionals who have joined forces to gain and exchange knowledge and build capacity in the context of the reconstruction of Ukraine. We're just over a year old, but we have already managed to organize a number of lectures, courses, symposiums, and studio visits. We strive for a modern, sustainable, and flourishing Ukraine as a part of European Union. So we seek to cooperate with the best practices universities in the world, such as TU Delft. This course seeks to discuss spatial strategies for an integrated urban recovery in post-conflict settings, investigating the process of reconstruction and what the notion of building back better implies, tackling inequalities, strengthening the capacities of local actors, and pursuing a green, resilient, and inclusive urban recovery anchors on the sound spatial planning, design, and policy. In the development phases of this course, we wanted to use the term post-conflict as an open term that allows to use converse with colleagues not only from Ukraine, but also from other areas affected by conflict and violent shocks. However, it is important to acknowledge that language has been used as a tool for the disinformation and the erosion of public debate. And we want to fully acknowledge that what is going on in Ukraine at the moment is a full, senseless, and tragic war perpetrated by a madman on a fully sovereign state. While the war is not finished yet, it's not over yet. We want to salute our friends and colleagues from Ukraine who bravely bear the brunt of this war and whom we wish to wholeheartedly support. All instructors in this course are working voluntarily as a service to the reconstruction of Ukraine and in support to our Ukrainian friends and colleagues. So about today's lecture. The title of this session is Redressing Socio-Environmental Injustice Through the Urban Recovery. And today our speakers is Dr. Julia Wellesley. She's already here with us. She's an independent researcher at the intersection of urban development, environmental justice, and critical pedagogies. She holds BCS in environmental and natural resource management from the University of Applied Life Science in Vienna, and MSS in ecosystem governance and globalization from Stockholm University. She also holds a PhD and a postdoc by the Bartlett Development Planning Unit, University College London. And also today with us, our Ukrainian commentator, VITA Schnaider, who is an anthropologist, researcher of urban protest movements with the MA's Sociology and Social Anthropology, Central European University. Yeah, I think I did my part. Thanks a lot for joining us. And Julia and Vita, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pablo. Thank you so much, Roberto, and everyone for the invitation to speak today, and also for pairing me with Vita in that session. I think she's become much more than a commentator, and very much an integral part of how we framed it today. So I just want to acknowledge that from the get-go. Let me just share my screen and hope that it works.
Yes, perfectly.
Good. That's step one done then. So, sorry. What we wanted to do today are basically proposed three learning outcomes. So on the one hand, to look at the key dimensions of social environmental injustices and how that concept might help us to address some of the tensions that might be happening in urban recovery in terms of the environment, economic dimensions, social dimensions. Then to reflect on policies and practices for resilient and green recovery, and importantly, how that might resonate with the experiences that everyone, all the participants are bringing to this room. And then finally, to collectively develop key questions that one might need to ask in terms of urban recovery processes to identify and then also subsequently to redress environmental injustices. And that third point pretty much came from a discussion that Vita and I had. On the one hand, that we did not want to impose a concept, but we'd rather like to raise questions. We'd like to use this lecture as a provocation for discussion. Also for those people who might not be working explicitly on environmental issues, but who might be coming from planning, housing, a different transport, different sectors that touch on the environment, but are maybe not having those discussions explicitly.
Julia,
yes.
sorry to interrupt. I feel like, is it loading on your screen as well? Because we don't see anything at the moment.
Oh, can you? That is not good. No, it's not loading on my screen. Let me just reshare then and try it again.
Sorry, yeah.
Classic one. No. Please interrupt whenever I do something that doesn't make sense.
Yes, no, I think it works perfectly. Yeah.
Do you see expected learning outcomes, or do you see something else?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's good. Okay, good. So that basically is what I just introduced. And again, you let me know if it doesn't change. So the outline of the session, the idea was that we would start with a brief discussion lecture on how and why to integrate environmental perspectives into urban recovery. Then we'll have some breakout rooms and do group works to exchange experiences. And then we're coming back into a plenary discussion, commentary, and then close the session. So in a very rough way of framing, and again, this is an invitation to also add comments in the chat and to complement what we know about major environmental impacts of conflicts and wars. On the one hand, obviously, that the environmental degradation goes beyond the spatial and the temporal boundaries of the war and of the conflict. So we know, for example, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, that there is around 200,000 hectares of agricultural land that are still mined. And authorities there estimate that it would take another 40 years from now to essentially demine the land and make it available again for agricultural purposes. Then also spatially, we obviously also know that countries at the receiving end experience disproportionate environmental devastation that has been documented in the case of the US, the UK, attacking the Falkland Islands, the war there, as well as the Iraq. So there's a lot of complexities in what do we think about and when do we think about when we're thinking about and where do we think about when we think about environmental impacts. The second point is that, again, very obvious, the reasons for environmental degradation are very complex and they're very highly contextual. So deforestation is one of the impacts that is often cited when it comes to conflict and the impacts, but that can be to a variety of different reasons. There is documentation of guerrilla activities and the movement of vehicles through forests. In other cases, it's about the mining of metals to finance conflicts, and there's also activities of increased loggings by IDPs. So the sources and the reasons for why a certain environmental impact occurs might be very different depending on the context. The other point is that there's a lot of knock-on effects in the sense that, for example, if you're thinking about bombs or missiles that are creating craters are impacting how soil is being compacted. And that, again, then might contribute to erosion, which might degrade water quality at some point. So it's not as direct as cause effect as it might seem in some cases. And then the third is, and again, very obvious, that the environment is not a standalone feature, but that it very much interacts with our infrastructure, with our built environment, with us. So in Afghanistan, there has been, about 70% of the irrigation network has been lost in this country, which then led to massive drought and crop failures in a country that is as arid. Okay, now I can move my slides. The final point on this very broad start is that it's important to think not only about like the direct environmental impacts of the conflict and the war while it occurs, but very much about the preconditions and the legacies. So Patak and colleagues have talked about the treadmill of destruction and the environmental impacts that militarization has, and how little the military sector is in any way pressured or obliged to think about their environmental impacts and to do something about them. Likewise, the resource curse has been discussed a lot, which means that countries, for example, with rare materials are being overexploited, over-dependent, and very much bear the brunt of a lot of the extractivism that happens to produce certain military goods. And then there has also been this very interesting study in terms of what are the long-term effects, the long-term environmental impacts of conflicts. It has been like a meta study with a very complicated methodology, which I won't go into detail. But the kind of bottom line, I would say, is that it needs both the economic recovery as well as high levels of democracy to talk about environmental recovery. So there have been studies, for example, in India and Sri Lanka, which were qualified as low-income countries, trying with high levels or relatively high levels of democracy, trying to recover environmentally, but they had to face a lot of trade-offs because of their economic capacity. Likewise, countries with authoritarian regimes with higher economic capacity see a lot of elite capture, where there's very little incentive to act sustainably, where a lot of high-income people would exploit resources, and therefore environmental recovery does not occur either. So what we want to do today is to think about, as Pablo has also outlined in the overall session, to think about recovery not only as a reversal to a status quo and to how the built environment, how the environment was before the war, but also to think about what would it look like to work towards social and environmental justice and sustainability. What would it take? And with that, I'm going to hand over to Vita to give us a bit more of a deep dive into the Ukrainian context.
Thank you, Julia. It was a great intro. So what do we know about the environmental impacts of the war in Ukraine so far? It's not an exhaustive list, and I think after the war we will find out much more things about it. But the most talked about are obviously these, the toxic waste, which is generated by...
Yeah, now it works.
Cool.
Yeah. So, the next thing is obviously, okay, not so obviously, but it comes from the legacy of Ukraine being, having very centralized infrastructural systems. So the electricity, water, they're all very centralized, and thus when anything in this network gets interrupted by missiles, explosions, then people, like we saw this, experienced it during this winter, people start using more individual oil power generators, but also, except from this, the armed vehicles and increasing the oil power transportation, all of those add to the carbon high traffic and carbon emissions. Moreover, it was talked a lot, the illegal export of grains and different production facilities by Russian army, which also contributes to resource extraction and overuse, but also industrial waste. And obviously the most visible and part of this is the destroyed buildings and infrastructures, which consequently caused the mass internal and out-country migration, but also a lot of industrial waste. This not to mention the mining of territories that Julia already talked about in the case of Bosnia. Next is that the direct implications of this on human environmental health, biodiversity, and climate change are that the contamination, shrinkage of drinking water, also high food insecurity, the danger of spread infectious diseases, lowering capacity of controlling them, but also loss of plant animal species, land pollution, and deforestation. And now I would like to talk about a concrete example of this, the recent event, the explosion on Kachovska Dam on the 6th of June and the consequences of flooding. So I'm myself more of a housing researcher, so that's why I'd like to talk more about this, that on the one side, this flood created some kind of personal responsibility, because housing in Ukraine is mostly privatized. 86% of housing are in private individual ownership, and thus it's as if the responsibility of every household, what happens to their house. On the other side, obviously a common environmental disaster which should be dealt with joint efforts. So what people experience here directly is that they have nowhere to evacuate to, because there is no public housing available in Ukraine, and the facilities for temporary housing are very limited, and often people decide to stay, especially if on their floor there wasn't a flood. On the other side, there is very big problem with the repair, since the water is now going away, leaving the houses destroyed after this, but the state has very limited financial capacities, and they provide only 124 euros per person for the repair, which is very insufficient. But also the difficulty of staying in this on this territory is the shortage of drinking water, the electricity disruption, and the almost full suspension of public infrastructures in this area. So this is how some kind of environmental disaster makes this direct impact on everyday life of people.
Thank you, Vita. And on that, and we're very, very aware that has been quite a heavy start into this session. We would like you to go to menti.com. We have a code here, which perhaps, I don't know, Vita, if you could also post it in the chat, 3755 66 95. And what we would like to know is if you're thinking about either the case study of your final assignment or some city or case that you're familiar with, which negative environmental impacts has it experienced or has it experienced most? Let me just move over to Mentimeter so I can actually start that. That presentation there. And then you should have access to. Yes, that seems to work. And if someone would like to share an experience related to, flooding, I think has been coming up, and it's indeed, I think, worldwide one of the most eminent or the most dominant risk. If someone would like to speak and share, please feel free, raise a hand. Yes, I see Kugela. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce it correctly.
Hello.
Yes.
Am I audible? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Kogila from India. So I would like to specify on the one of the disasters which happened on 2017 in southern part of India, Kerala. There was a massive flood because a couple of turbines in the dam of the state were opened, and there was unexpected heavy rainfall. So the flood was so much that there were a minimum 7 districts, like half of 50% of the whole state of Kerala was underwater. And it cost a lot of lives because there was a huge menace in the public property. It was damaged. And there were so many electricity cables which got electrocuted, and it was hanging in the water. So it was very difficult to rescue so many people because the most of the flooded area were agricultural land, and the main crop which is grown there is paddy, which requires standing water and marshy soil. So some of the houses who were flooded, which was flooded, was also sinking into the ground because the soil got loose. Even after like 2 months of rigorous work by the government, NGOs, and other organizations, even though the water was washed off, there was a huge menace of snakes. It was very poisonous and venomous, which got stuck inside the houses, different corners. Like when people went back to their houses, they suffered from huge snake bites, which again caused loss of life in a huge number. So there were so many agencies which on overnight basis gave capacity building and trainings how to catch snakes and release them, or catch them and cage them, so that the wildlife people can come and take it over. But
Kogela, sorry to interrupt, but if you could come to a conclusion because we have very limited time. Sorry to press you.
Sure, thank you. So the conclusion was that the government understood taking low lines and using agricultural land for construction purposes was not a good idea, and using multidisciplinary disciplines and expertise for planning such places is a must. So that was the takeaway in brief.
Thank you, Kogela, for sharing what sounds like a very, very complex case. And I think what you have beautifully highlighted also through that case is that there are certain, of course, natural factors that are at play, the kinds of soil, etc. But mostly when we're talking about the vulnerabilities of people, there's a lot of political reasons behind it. No, the different kinds of property rights that you've mentioned, the infrastructure, the electricity failures, and the different decisions that were made immediately in the aftermath of the disaster, but then also in the long-term planning. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. I would like to, and again, please let me know if you don't see my slides. Do you see what I share or not?
For now, it's a black screen.
Oh, great. Okay. Better?
Yes.
Okay. So what we would like to come now in kind of like the next step of the lecture is to look a bit at the policy commitments and the policies and the strategies that are being rolled out and that have already been rolled out before. And actually, yeah, the first important point to note in terms of environmental, climate, energy policy, and I think the majority of the discussion right now is on energy, is that not to discount all the previous policies that have existed pre-war, because Ukraine has been transitioning towards green and renewable energies, has been committing to reduce significantly its emissions by 2030 and become carbon neutral. I think it was by 2060. So yeah, the first thing is to say that when we're talking about urban recovery and from an environmental perspective is to see like, okay, what are the commitments that have already been here before the war and how are they shaping and how are they contributing to the discussion. The second point is that with Ukraine preparing to join the EU, that also means commitments towards becoming part of a climate neutral continent by 2050. The sustainable development goals by 2030. And here, I think what I want to highlight just is that, for example, the SDG 7, which is talking about energy and ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all, has a sub-target 7A, which is talking explicitly about enhancing international cooperation to facilitate the access to clean energy, research, technology, including renewable energy, energy efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. It's a vague target, but I think it's very important to highlight, again, that there are certain agreements at global, at regional scale that are already in place that are important to consider. And then you've probably also read about last week's Ukraine Recovery Conference in London, where this notion of the Green Marshall Plan has been evoked again like numerous times. And also, I mean, what the major differences to the Marshall Plan 75 years ago are, and that being on the one hand, the heavy reliance on the private sector, but then also, and again, please correct me in the chat, I think that it would only cover a third of the investments that are currently calculated to be needed. So what this Green Marshall Plan seems to be focusing on, as far as I understand, is on developing a coal-free or a green steel industry, with the rationale that many of the country's legacy steel plants were built in locations that suited their reliance on coal, but they now can be built closer to iron ore deposits and away from the Donbas region. And then the fourth commitment, which I want to highlight, which I think has already been part of this course, is the declaration that was made in the previous recovery conference in Lugano in July 2022, which created a framework for the political process to guide reconstructions. And what you can see in that image at the bottom are kind of the subcomponents of the sustainability agenda. So on the one hand, talking about environmental climate governance architecture and how to finance it, towards building clean energy and green buildings, towards a new green economy, and towards preserving the environment and developing biodiversity. Again, this has been a part of previous sessions of this course, but in all those policy documents, it's very difficult or impossible to go around that notion of urban resilience or resilience and building back better. So I don't want to repeat much of what has already been said on both discourses. I think they're highly appealing, obviously, to public as well as private actors. And the question is really how to engage with them to make them productive in a way. So I wanted to share with you what is on the right-hand side. There's a study that's been done in 2016 already by Sarah Meyer and colleagues, which I think is still a very, very useful review of resilience, the different components, the characteristics of urban resilience particularly. And I think what they also develop are those very essential, I think, questions to give some meat to that concept and to make it work. So, you know, the who of the resilience, who determines what is desirable, who determines what is better, whose resilience is being prioritized, and importantly, who is included, excluded, different questions on the what. I think the when question is also something that is very pertinent, and that also, Pablo, I think you've mentioned in the introduction, the question of the post-conflict or post-war recovery and when it starts, and the different answers you might get to that question, whether you're asking someone who is coming from an insurance company and providing international finance, or whether you ask someone who's actually living in Ukraine at the moment. So there's a lot of critical questions, and I just also, I mean, the slides will be shared as usual, so you can have a more detailed look at that paper if you're interested. So coming now, like, from the policy discourse to what it might talk about in on a discursive level in terms of resilience and building back better. We just wanted to finish by outlining some of the housing challenges in environmental sustainable urban recovery. And again, I think that is coming, the focus on housing is coming more from Vita's and my background. But I'm very happy to see if that discussion could be taken forward later in sectors of mobility and transport and energy and so on and so forth. So one of the key concerns that's always been voiced is like, oh yeah, but if you build, if you rebuild environmentally friendly, you cannot afford that. Who can afford to live in those houses, etc. So there is a key concern that is displacement that could happen through green gentrification. And there are multiple experiences, and I have to say most of the experiences are coming from Western Europe and also from North America, where the discourse on green gentrification has been, I think, quite dominant. Suggesting already very specific and concrete tools. And I really recommend the publication that I've put on the right from the Barcelona Laboratory for Urban Environmental Justice and Sustainability. And one of the cases that they're describing, for example, is Nantes in France, which has been renaturing the city, which has like 100, I think more than 100 parks built over the last decades. And one of the issues in which they try, or one of the ways in which they're trying to address green gentrification is to look for equitable distribution of those green spaces. So they have a normative framework which guarantees that all inhabitants live within 300 meters of one of the 100 municipal parks and green areas. And there should be a minimum of 57 square meters of green space per person. So that in that way, they're trying to avoid an agglomeration of green spaces in the wealthy areas at the expense of areas with lower income people. At the same time, they also have very strict housing preservation policies, and they have mandatory that new real estate development have, I think it was 25 and 35% of public and social housing as part of also building very mixed use developments, etc. So that's just like one example of how green gentrification can be avoided, and there are many, many more in that booklet. The other key tension that I wanted to raise, and I think that also relates a bit to the previous contribution and also to what Vita talked about in the dam disaster, is the question of relocation or in situ risk reduction. And there we've seen, for example, I mean, many different components that need to be thought about in that regard, and it's a highly complex topic. But just to give you an example, in Colombia, in the conflict situation in the 90s, there was a lot of migration to urban areas, a lot of migration, particularly from people from low income backgrounds. And because the housing provision was not sufficient by far, those people had to settle down in areas that were highly hazardous. So on steep slopes, with landslides, with mudslides being a constant risk, or close to rivers, etc. Now, there was a study done, I think it was now like around 15 years ago, and they found that out of the 8 million housing units that exist in Colombia, 750,000 were located in areas of what they deemed mitigable risk, and 280,000, which is about 4% of the whole housing stock, in areas of unmitigable risk. Now, that kind of raises at least two key points, which I think, I just want to raise and put out there. So the one thing is that what we deem mitigable and not is not only a technical assessment, but in that case, and I would be curious to hear how it is in Ukraine, it's also an economic one. So if you are able to invest, or not you as a person, but if the state deems a particular area wealthy enough to invest in mitigation, it can happen, but maybe other people are not economically able to do so, or don't have the economic capacities at the moment or in the future. So they're deemed as not, these areas that are then deemed as not mitigable. So the question is, how do you promote housing upgrading? How do you promote resettlement programs without deepening those inequalities that are inbuilt into the way people have to live in certain hazardous conditions. And then the other question in Colombia, with 4% of the housing stock being deemed unmitigable in unmitigable risk areas, is the question of scale. So we know that resettlement from the perspective of people is highly challenging socially, economically, culturally. There are severe disruptions to how people live. But the Colombian case, I think, also raises the economic case, that the costs for 4% are just immense. So the general approach is to see relocation in that context as the very last resort. That question of mitigable, not mitigable also brings me to the next point, which is, and perhaps I don't have to say this in this group, but I think in general, there is still a framing of investments in housing, in eco-efficient housing, etc., that is a very technical discussion, and that sometimes is a bit depoliticized. So the importance of reframing how we're recovering, how environmental sustainable recovery is not a technical question, but is also very much a political one. And then finally, and again, that might be more related to Western Europe and to the US, but the discussion focuses very much on energy efficiency. But we know that we cannot reduce our carbon footprints as much as needed if we don't also talk about sufficiency and what is enough. And with that, address very inconvenient questions of redistribution of, say, property rights, of resource ownerships, and all the embedded inequalities. Vita, over to you for locating that in Ukraine.
Yeah, I think it was a great slide. I loved it because exactly in Ukraine, we can say that, yes, on the Lugano conference and Green Marshall Plan, it was stated that Ukraine wants to rebuild sustainable housing, that Ukraine is committed to the green goals, but in fact, what happened during the last year in regards to housing was the law for compensations for destroyed property, but actually nothing else. So what Ukraine is currently working on is the compensation for homeowners whose housing was destroyed. What happens to the people who did not own the house but whose home was destroyed? What happens to people who cannot reach the territories where they used to live and cannot make photo proofs to apply for this compensation? What happens in general if there will not be enough funds to finance this law? So those are questions that kind of ask, can we really do this? Because the housing crisis is massive in Ukraine. There is the huge displacement, housing shortage, increasing poverty, because people are using their savings for rent. At the same time, rent prices in the so-called safer territories in the West are blowing up. And there is the obvious economic stagnation in the country. So what I wanted to bring here is that if the state only is concerned with the support of private construction sector to battle this housing crisis, that this is a very narrow road to go, and that I just want to emphasize the need for more sustainable and affordable housing options, and that the commitment to green goals and sustainability in housing production should also be reflected in new policies on social and affordable housing. This is it.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't see my mute button. Thank you. And I think there's a lot of points that are resonating, and also from the chat. Thank you so much for the contributions. There is indeed, after a space to share your experiences, to share your thoughts, your knowledge on different kinds of policies and planning. So hold with us for another 10 minutes or so, and then there's plenty of time for discussion. We want to do another round of mentees, and I hope that this time you can see my screen while I do it. Basically, to think about the same case as you had before, or another one if you want to, but basically to describe in a few words one key trade-off that is already being experienced in this case, or that you're expecting it will experience in the recovery. And sorry, I'm just going to move over to the other mentee. The code is the same as before. And I hope it is loading. Can you see?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, the quality of public space. Whoever wrote that, if you want to talk along it and let us know what the trade-off is, or the specific trade-off is that you're talking about, that would be really helpful. Or some of the other inputs in terms of time, price, quality of housing, environmental standards, soil pollution and environmental pollution, and that cheapest materials and systems are used to build faster. I think that's a very important also point that relates back to the resilience discussion earlier, that I forgot to mention actually. One of the, I think, the key contributions of that debate is to see how do we avoid lock-ins? How do we avoid making decisions in the short term that are very, very difficult to reverse in the longer term, and they're actually locking us in on even more unsustainable pathways, and that are going to be much more costly in the long term. So I think that the question of what now, what later, and cheap and fast and long and expensive, in very blunt terms, is a very important one. Again, is there someone who would like to share in 2 minutes or so their contribution and what it is about, so I don't have to guess?
Yeah, maybe people can just raise a hand in the chat, and then we'll come back to you.
Can I add a bit? I kind of missed it from the previous slide, that, yeah, one of the trade-offs that I wanted to talk about is the dropping down the public approval for the construction. So in Ukraine, there is this, there has to be a public hearing if the public land is given for the construction. And now there are discussions of cutting this demand down to build faster. And I think it also relates to yeah, it also makes a big influence on how political processes will go in the city, and who decides and how the decisions are made. And in a way, it's relatable to the cheaper construction materials being used.
Definitely. And the way that, yeah, guidelines, laws, norms are adhered to versus how there's some expediting of processes which are under the names of emergency governance or state of emergency has happened in many cases. Okay, wonderful. That's a great contribution. And again, I think we can make that available later on the website, right? For everyone to have a look at the mentee if you want to. So let me just see if I can go back to the slides for the very last one. Then I'm gonna stop jumping around. Can you see it?
We've seen it before. Now it's loading again. Maybe
yeah, as always.
And if someone has an idea of why that is happening all the time, then I would be very grateful. I'm very sorry for that.
Perfect. No.
I thought that like year 3 after the pandemic, I should be able to manage Zoom. Sorry. So I think the final slide is really just before we go into group work as a way of understanding, diagnosing, on the one hand, those trade-offs and how they can be looked at from an environmental justice perspective, but then also to use those kinds of the 3 different areas to think about ways of addressing those injustices. And I remember that, like, I think 2 sessions ago, you had the same triangle in the spatial justice dimension. So this is just like a slight reframing from an environmental dimension. So on the one hand, if we start from the top with equitable distribution, that is, for example, addressed through the inclusionary zoning practices that I mentioned before in France, where the new real estate projects require a certain amount of social and affordable housing, and the distribution of green spaces is equal among the cities. Also, the questions that Vita raised in terms of housing, what benefits, what support do tenants receive, what support do homeowners receive, etc. The recognition dimension is essentially foregrounding how people with their intersectional identities are recognized or not. So again, like the regulations for tenants, how they are according to gender, how they are according to age, how they are according to class or socioeconomic background, etc. And working with the same examples of France, for example, what they found, and I think that was like before 2019, was that while you had an equal distribution of green spaces across the city, and therefore access was equitable, the quality of the green spaces was very different. So particularly migrant districts, the districts with working class people, had lower quality green spaces, and they were, again, like agglomerated in a certain area of the city. So the questions, who is being rendered invisible, and who is being considered when certain policies and plans are developed and not. And then the dimension of parity of political participation is essentially related to, again, what you had, I think, 2 sessions ago, the question of participatory planning approaches, and really if people are being participated and informed about plans that are already existing or maybe consulted, or whether they have genuine capacities and the powers to shape the process and to shape the outcomes. So when we're thinking again in housing in terms of not only constructing a house, but developing and building together with people, so that questions of maintenance are addressed, that people have a sense of ownership, not only of their house, but also of the surrounding spaces, the common areas, etc. So those are aspects of how people are participating in the entire process. So let me just check the watch. We are a bit tight on time. So I would suggest that we shorten that discussion to 20 minutes or so. We're going to divide you into breakout rooms and ask you to discuss the following questions. We're going to post them in the chat, so no stress to click on a link and join the room. Do not do it yet. We're also going to post a mirror board in the chat. Also, please just copy it, but do not open it yet. What we want to ask you is, on the one hand, again, to, in your group, exchange and think about the same city or case that you have addressed, that you have used for the Menti right now, or any other case that you're familiar with, and see which of the environmental challenges from the presentation resonate with your case. And then also which additional ones do you identify that we haven't touched upon? Again, like, we've been fairly selective, and this has by no means been like any attempt to be comprehensive. So whatever you think which relates to the topic that you would like to add, please discuss and exchange on that. And then we would like to ask you to select 1 or 2 cases from your group and formulate 3 questions as a group to see, what questions do you need to ask and also to answer eventually to be able to address environmental injustices in your case. We would like everyone to assign at least 1 representative from the group to present. I'm aware that this is a fairly large course, so we might not be able to get around to have everyone speaking at the end, but maybe we can do this over the chat and we can discuss, continue the discussion afterwards. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And before
I just want to make sure everybody is seeing the instructions in the meeting chat, because sometimes people miss it. So please look at the chat. Vita has just posted something.
Thank you, Vita.
I have to ask my friend Caroline to help me here, because with the can you make the breakout rooms, Julia?
Let me.
Yeah.
Yes, I can actually. Yes.
Yeah.
Can I?
Because I can't for some reason. So
okay.
you can do it.
Okay, then I'm just gonna go ahead. I'm also posting the Miro link in the chat, and because there have been issues with reaching capacity, what we would like to ask you is to just copy the link, and as soon as you're in your room, there have been rooms already assigned, right? Sorry.
Yeah, you can just open them.
Okay.
Yeah.
As soon as you're in your rooms, decide on 1 or 2 people who will document on the Miro board, so that only 2 people per group will join the board, and hopefully it won't collapse. If it does collapse, don't worry, you still have the questions here. Just take notes in whatever form you like, and we see you back in 20 minutes. Everything clear, or any questions?
The link to the Miro board is, now I see it. Yeah, now I see it. Please, everybody, have a look at the link before you go into the breakout room.
And if you have any questions, just come back to the main room.
Okay, I think now you can do it.
I already did.
Oh yeah, I can see it. Yes.
Yeah.
Something is not working.
No. Does it allow you to assign to join any room?
I assume people should get the invitation to the room first, and then it means that it works.
Okay.
Yeah, because there are lots of people that are unassigned for some reason. So maybe
I can just start manually. It will take a lot of time, but let's try.
Anna, I don't think you can assign. You can. You can join the chat.
No.
I also can't assign manually, Roberto.
Yeah, I can. So I'm trying to assign people manually.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, some people are writing in the chat that they cannot, but I think it takes some time because it's manually invitation.
Yeah, we are not having a good experience with Zoom. I will tell you that. I will write to Zoom and complain.
There is also a question in the chat if it is possible to join the local room from the, I assume from the phone gadget.
How to join? Okay, let me just see if we find him. Then we can.
So we are still so a bit of patience because we're still trying to put everybody in rooms.
I just moved him.
Okay, we did it. Oh my God.
There's still some people in the room.
Still 33 people, yeah.
There.
Yeah, they need to join the. They should receive an invitation on their gadgets, and they need to join the rooms that they were assigned.
Yeah, if also somebody missed the invitation, on the left side of your screen, you have like the 4 squares, like which says rejoin the session room or something. So you can get it from there.
Okay, there's 22 people on Mira, which is a good amount. Can I stop the recording? Or
Roberto, if you are talking, you are muted.
No, I'm nothing important. Okay, people are getting back to the main room.
I agree. It's always too short. So Vita and I have been sneak peeking on the Miro board, and rather than having a lengthy discussion about volunteers, we wanted to ask specifically if, for example, room 18 would be interested in presenting what they had discussed. Is there someone here from room 18 who would be willing to be volunteered? Or
maybe it was mine. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was.
was okay.
please, thank you.
Yeah. We. I don't know, Elisa. You want to?
Yes, I'm here. I can share the screen so they can see what we wrote. Or okay. Okay, here we go.
Just a black screen for now.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, can you see? Because
Yeah,
I
now
don't
we
know.
can.
Yes, yes.
Okay. I don't know who wants to speak because I mean I can, but if Anna wants to say.
Yeah. We just realized that most of us are thinking to study earthquake recovery. Then the main environmental challenges that we identify was water contamination, which is linked to the also with the soil erosion, mainly because of the new constructions after the earthquake. They are placed in the agricultural land. And also this has an impact in the quality of air, so also air contamination. So we discuss a bit here, and then we, in the last maybe 20 seconds, we decide 1 or 2 questions. So who owns the water sources? I don't know. And the other is, I don't know, maybe Eliza want to explain?
No, actually I wrote just who owns the water sources. And I don't know who added Mother Nature.
I wasn't.
The appropriate
So-
answer.
Because I didn't.
Yeah. This what was possible.
Thank you. And I think, I mean, Iran and earthquakes in Iran is a challenging topic to discuss. And I think it closely links also to the discussion that we had earlier on building permits and building regulations and who is allowed to build what on which type of land, what is deemed safe or low risk and what isn't. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope this will be turned into a text in the end with the assignment.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do have time for one more group maybe. And the other case that we'd love to hear more about, because it might resonate very strongly, is the one from Beirut and group 1. Is there someone here who would be willing to present?
Yes. Hello.
Hello. Yes. Go ahead.
Yes. So I'm a researcher at the American University of Beirut. So I'm interested to learn from a failed state. In other words, what can we learn from the post-war reconstruction process in Beirut? And what can we learn from the post-recovery project after the blast that happened, the port blast? So we are interested to investigate more in terms of governance, the failed governance that was adopted, and also the participation that didn't happen or take place. So from this failure, we can understand or we can inform the recovery process in Ukraine. So we're gonna take like Beirut as a case study to understand the failure of this case, which can inform us in the urban recovery of Ukraine in terms of governance, participation, especially in both, especially in terms like spatially, like the Beirut downtown. Yeah. And also to frame it well, and to resonate with your presentation, like the key goals of sustainability, actually, like how we can frame it also, to frame the problematic with these 3 goals of sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add something to that? Because I think it's super interesting what you're saying. And I think one of the signs of the failed state, as you put it, is the fact that the center of Beirut was reconstructed by this private company. So it was like, can you say something about that, Ali?
Yes, actually, I just need to introduce myself. Actually, I'm an architect, but I studied urban planning and policy at the American University of Beirut. Then I defended my thesis before the Beirut blast, the port blast. And then I joined the Beirut Urban Lab and worked as an urban researcher in the Beirut Urban Lab. So I have an experience in the post-war project of the war, and I worked in the Beirut Urban Lab in the urban recovery project after the port blast. Then I worked with Professor Melanie Kamet at Harvard. She's Professor International Affairs as research assistant. So she's working on 3 countries, which is Bosnia, Northern Ireland, and Lebanon. She's working, her research is about how the communities that experienced violence, how they adapted after this violence, after it ended. So to return back to the case study, to the Beirut. So after the civil war, the post-reconstruction process was totally privatized. So the state gave a permit through a special legislation for a private reconstruction company to take over the reconstruction process. And actually what happened, the people were not engaged and were totally displaced. And now the Beirut downtown, the city center, is totally vacant. So actually we need to understand the privatization that happened in the city was at the expense of the collective and it was not people-centered. It was aimed to build a real estate company that can bring a capital to the city at the expense of the people.
Of the citizens, right? I think this process of privatization of the city was really...
I just need to highlight that as an urban planners, we are not against the private sector, but we are against any approach in the reconstruction process that is not people-centered and doesn't take into consideration the needs of the people, the needs of the environment, and to respond to the collective good of the city. If we didn't work in this approach, then we will end up in huge injustices in the city, and we will end up in the city that it's exclusive. And if this city will face any instability in the future, we will end up with a vacant city like Lebanon. So the key strategy that was adopted by the state after the civil war is to build a city for the rich and to attract capital for the city. But during the instability that happened in Lebanon, including the different assassinations and that occurred after 2005, the entire city turned into vacant and the capital went out from the city. And all the displaced people, as I said, were not included in the reconstruction and were totally displaced.
I think there is a real danger that such thing could happen also in other places.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to understand that the recovery process, and here there is a huge difference between the reconstruction and the recovery. And we need to understand, to frame the term of recovery. What do we mean by recovery? And to frame it properly before introducing any kind of policy.
Thank you, Ali.
Because as I said, that the recovery, it's not only to recover the space, but also to recover the socio-spatial practices and to recover these practices in the cities, in public spaces also. And we can't recover if we didn't think about the common good of the city and the common good of the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said before, it's not only about capital, it's about how we can really think about all the opportunities that we have in order to recover.
Thanks. Julia, the word is yours.
I actually wanted to ask if either Vita or Pablo would like to share some reflections on both of the contributions before we pass over to Roberto for the final assignment.
Yeah, I can totally relate to what Ali said, but also to the previous contribution, because I think the governance is a crucial thing here. So the one thing are the declarations, what we want, but another thing is how this works with the already existing governance practices and how this will then merge together, what will come out of this. I think Ali's case is it is a real danger of what might happen in Ukraine. And I saw on one of the boards that people here also think about it from the veto, the law 5655. Yeah, I'm really glad this came up. Thank you.
Sorry, I just need to highlight also, after the port blast, the state was not engaged in the recovery process. So what happened that the NGOs took the lead, but we should understand that to think about this question, who's the custodian of the public good? Because after the port blast, NGOs failed to be the custodian of the public good. So we need to also, we should think about not to think only about one actor, but to understand the wider umbrella. And we think this is a critical question in any recovery project. Who's the custodian of public good? Who are the actors, and how we can respond to the goals of sustainability in this process?
I couldn't agree more. We put a lot of emphasis on public goods when we're teaching, and I think one of the main questions that arises is who is providing those public goods and for whom, where are they accessible? And I think you really touch a nevralgic point of the reconstruction. Thanks, Ali.
Most welcome.
I wonder if anybody else would like to say a few words? We are on time here, but
we had some active people on the chat, so I don't know if maybe Janina Basiste, if you want to say something, because you've been writing a lot.
No, I'm just reflecting on what Ali, yes, Ali, yeah. On what Ali has just said, that without common understanding of these obvious for somebody notions, we will really fail. And for me, for example, like this environmental justice, environmental injustice, it's not always very clear what we are talking really about. And for politicians, this recovery concept also, what we mean by recovery. And what I see right now, what's going on in Ukraine, that we need to just quickly renovate houses that were destroyed in order to provide people at least the basic dwelling possibilities. That's why I really, when I'm thinking by myself how to insert, how to implement that Green Deal, for example, or new European Bauhaus in real recovery efforts in Ukraine, I can't imagine. I can't feel this moment how to put it into action, for example, for the old houses, and who will pay actually for it. So I have a lot of questions now, and I can discuss it like, you know, forever.
Yes, but it's understandable because these are very complex issues. But you raise, thanks for raising the right questions, I would say. I wonder if somebody else, Caroline or somebody else, would like to say a few words before we close.
No, Roberto. Maybe it's good if you take some time to explain the exercise.
Okay.
Assignment.
Look, thanks everyone. Well, first of all, Julia and Vita, amazing lecture. Thank you so much for your contribution. Thanks, Pablo, for guiding us today. I just wanted to say a few words now at the end, because I saw such nice comments in the chat about people who are experiencing issues on the ground there. Somebody said, well, I'm from that city that was flooded because of the dam and etc. So I want to encourage you, those who are here and who want to deliver a final assignment, to think of yourselves as reporters of this war. And for those who are not in Ukraine, it doesn't matter. We have the same in India, like Kogela was telling us. We have the same issues in Lebanon, like Ali was describing. So I would really encourage everybody to think of yourselves as reporters, and that you can deliver an assignment that tells us a story, that raises questions, like was being done now, and maybe give us a little direction of, okay, how this course has changed your thoughts about it or added to your thoughts about it, and that should be the final assignment for us. Really, we are looking for these stories, for these narratives, and also for kind of accounts about what's going on in the world. A lot of the students, a lot of the participants of this course are from Ukraine, so they have a lot to tell us, to report on what's going on. I wonder if we get all the information. I think we get a lot of information, but not complete. So please help us with that. Pablo, do you want to close?
Well, I think you already closed it quite well, but just to thank you, everybody. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Vita. Also, Roberto. Yeah, it seems like we have only one lecture left. So please, we'll be happy to see you all next time. It's next Monday, the same time, July the 3rd. Yeah, the lecture will be given by our good friend and actually our first lecturer, Julia Lawson, who is an adjunct professor, Center for Urban Research at RMIT University, Melbourne. Yeah, this lecture concerns the links between property rights, planning and development outcomes via land policy instruments. And these instruments include public land or banking, land readjustment, conditional land leasing, land use zoning, land value capture, and land taxation. Yeah, we also going to have Alexander Anisimov, who will be also commentator or co-lecturer for this last session. And yeah, please, thank you very much for today's discussion, and we're going to see you all next time.
Thanks guys. Thanks everyone. Really wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Discussion today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.